Effective January 1st, 2014, the Boy Scouts of America will no longer ban homosexual youth from membership. This is the result of a vote to change their membership standards that was decided on May 23rd. An excerpt from their statement reads as follows. Today, following this review, the most comprehensive listening exercise in Scouting's history, the approximate 1,400 voting members of the Boy Scouts of America's National Council approved a resolution to remove the restriction denying membership to youth on the basis of sexual orientation alone. The resolution also reinforces that Scouting is a youth program and any sexual conduct, whether heterosexual or homosexual, by youth of Scouting age is contrary to the virtues of Scouting. A change to the current membership policy for adult leaders was not under consideration. Thus, the policy for adults remains in place. This comes 22 years after the Girl Scouts of the USA officially renounced any discriminatory practices based on sexuality, and about a year and a half after the Girl Scouts announced that they accept transgender girls on a case-by-case basis. Yeah, it's rather wishy-washy, but definitely light years ahead of the Boy Scouts. At any rate, the Boy Scouts have officially changed their guidelines in regards to youth recruits. However, once a scout turns 18, he is no longer welcome as an avowed gay adult, as they put it. So is this a good thing? Yes and no. You see, it's great that they're taking steps towards discarding antiquated prejudices. But the fact that they still insist on denying membership to gay and lesbian adults is troubling. With that stipulation in place, homosexuality will still be viewed as unfavorable in the world of the Scouts. After all, if sexuality is no longer a concern regarding membership, then why continue to ban gay adults? Does this not still breed stigma and animosity toward LGBT individuals? And aren't they still just appealing to the lowest common denominator of bigots within their folds? I'm getting a very sinister message with this loophole. Granted, this is just speculation. I have no concrete evidence to provide for this. But what I'm getting from this continued ban on homosexual adults is the perpetuation of two long-standing myths about gay people. One, that homosexual adults cannot be trusted and are dangerous and predatory toward children. And two, without those kitty-fiddling gays around, Scout leaders will be free to counsel and fix their confused youth. Again, it's just a gut feeling, but certainly not one without good reasons. So with that in mind, why did they lift the ban? The official announcement didn't cite a reason, other than the BSA's National Council voted in favor of dropping the heterosexual-only clause with an overwhelming 61% to 38%, with 1% apparently not caring either way. It's pretty impressive, though. Maybe the Scouts really are evolving. Or not. You see, to have such a landslide vote in favor of allowing homosexual youth is rather unprecedented, considering that it was just barely a year ago, on June 7, 2012, when a committee of senior volunteers and leaders reached a unanimous consensus that it was the best policy for the Scouts to keep the ban against gays in place. And this was after a 2-year-long review. And now, just 12 months later, the BSA has made a complete about-face. What happened? It's quite confounding, given that the ban against homosexual adults has remained in place. It brings up the question of whether or not the BSA still considers gay and lesbians generally incapable of being morally straight, as mandated in the Scouting Handbook. Did their collective positions really undergo a radical change in such a short amount of time? Are they struggling with the question of ethics and stating that, on one hand, any boy can join, while at the same time making such gross exclusions based on irrelevant criteria? Have the majority of the faith-based organizations that charter 70% of all Scouting units finally progressed far enough to accept that homosexuality is not aberrant? No. No, bigotry never dies that easily. But like most bastions of morality, money talks, and they will bend their knees before the almighty dollar. Over the past several years, the Boy Scouts have lost much in the way of public and private sponsorship and financial support. As homophobia continues to become less and less in vogue, so too does the willingness to support a group that violates local non-discrimination policies. This includes public facilities such as local law and fire departments, and the backing from several cities, including New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, San Diego, Chicago, and Minneapolis. In addition, several charities like the United Way and the Pew Charitable Trusts, as well as several companies, now refuse to support the BSA as they have done in the past, including Chipotle, Merck & Company, CVS, Levi Strauss, Chase Manhattan Bank, Intel, and UPS. That's right, when push comes to shove, the BSA will bow to financial pressure. I'm not complaining. I mean, if this turns out to be the first step for the Boy Scouts to march proudly out of the 1950s, and that's great. After all, they haven't given a single reason to explain just how being LGBT is incompatible with Scouting in the first place. But here's the thing. They don't have to. They may have a bit of a monopoly on youth organizations, but they are still officially a private organization, and just like any private club or church, they have the right to discriminate against anybody they want. Citing Supreme Court case law, Boy Scouts of America versus Dale, the Scouts, as a private organization, have the right to exercise freedom of association under the First Amendment. This means that they cannot be compelled to accept members that they do not wish to have. And you know something? I agree with that. I don't think that any private club should be forced to accept individuals or groups that they do not want. The law, of course, doesn't protect against being made social pariahs by a society that no longer excludes certain groups, like the LGBT community, but that's irrelevant. The BSA should not be legally compelled to accept or retain individuals that they deem unfavorable. And that's all well and good, except for one thing. The federal government not only endorses the BSA, but it also funds and hosts their National Scout Jamborees. For the past 30 years, these jamborees have been hosted at Fort A.P. Hill, an Army base in Virginia, and on average, the U.S. government spends about $2 million per jamboree. Furthermore, the passing of the No Child Left Behind Act of 2002 included the Boy Scouts of America Equal Access Act, which mandates that public schools who allow use of their facilities to youth and community groups cannot deny the use of their facilities to the Boy Scouts. And since public schools are funded through taxation, this means that this act forces all U.S. citizens to support a private organization that openly discriminates against homosexuals. And that's bullshit. Unfortunately, there's no legal precedent that I know of regarding a private group that discriminates against LGBT individuals receiving public funding. But there is one regarding a different prejudice: religion. In addition to barring homosexual adults, the Boy Scouts also discriminate against atheists and agnostics. Citing the Boy Scout oath and law requiring him to do my duty to God and country, and the Scout Handbook declaring a Scout is reverent toward God and faithful in his religious duties, the Scouts consider non-believers to be incompatible with these requirements. So this basically makes the Scouts a religious organization, since members have to believe and actively worship a God. So let's recap. The First Amendment grants the Boy Scouts, a private organization, the freedom of association, and thereby the ability to legally discriminate based on religious affiliation. The U.S. government supports the BSA with funds accrued through taxation and compels public schools to allow them use of their facilities. This means that all U.S. citizens are being compelled to support a religious organization, and is therefore violating our First Amendment right to freedom of religion. The ACLU filed suit against the U.S. Armed Forces in Winkler v. Rumsfeld for its continuing funding of the National Scout Jamborees. In 2005, the U.S. District Court ruled that the Department of Defense's funding of the Jamborees do in fact violate the First Amendment, but the U.S. Court of Appeals reversed this decision 2 years later, stating that the ACLU, representing the taxpayers, had no grounds to bring suit. Apparently, despite the fact that a belief and active worship of God is a fundamental prerequisite for Scout membership, the Jamborees themselves are considered secular, and the role of religion in the Jamboree is tangential and analogous to the role of chaplains in the military itself. Perhaps, but in this veteran's opinion, there shouldn't be military chaplains either. But I digress. The point is, the BSA's recent relinquishing of the ban against homosexual youth is great, but the decision to continue the ban against homosexual adults is troubling. In fact, much of how the BSA wriggles out of responsibility of addressing the ethics of using taxpayer funding, knowing that their policies deeply hurt most U.S. citizens, by constantly pulling the private organization card is also troubling. And the government keeps acquiescing to them. It's only when public pressure and the loss of membership and private funding gets to be so great that the BSA has no choice but to start behaving morally straight. In addition to repealing the gay ban, the BSA finally broke down and purchased their own plot of land for their jamborees in response to widespread disgust of their continued use of a military base. However, nothing has been done to address their discrimination of non-believers or the government's violation of the First Amendment by forcing public schools to support a religiously discriminatory group. They need to fix all of that first before I join the celebration.